When we look at the magnificence of the earth, we are awed by its greatness and majesty. And every so often, great men are sent to this earth, leaving their legacy by making our world a better place simply because they were here. The memories of these great men never die. One such great man was Martin Luther King Jr. He idealized a world where everyone would be judged on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. It was his sense of idealism that gave hope to the hopeless and promise to those who for so long had been imprisoned within their own minds. He envisioned a world so great and so real that he could touch it and allow other people to touch it too. It's said that a dream is a metaphysical vision comprised of wants, wishes, and desires. Martin Luther King was not the first dreamer, but he would certainly be the dreamer that we would remember in our lifetime. It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one destiny affects all indirectly. Christmas Sermon, 1967. Dr. King championed a lot of causes, including environmental concerns. What is not known by many people is that he traveled to Memphis, Tennessee to assist with the sanitation workers' strike. He was a champion for environmental concerns and believed that all people needed to live with dignity and have clean air and clean water. Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. Ebenezer Baptist Church in 1968. The year 2020 saw the emergence of another type of hero. As the world was forced to close to combat the ravages of COVID-19, we witnessed the last become first. From healthcare workers to delivery drivers to your local grocery store workers, these frontline workers walked into danger every day to ensure our most basic needs were met. These were not CEOs or PhDs, kings or queens, but everyday people showing their greatness through service. Violence never really deals with the basic evil of the situation. Violence may murder the murderer, but it doesn't murder murder. Violence may murder the liar, but it doesn't murder lie. It doesn't establish truth. Violence may even murder the dishonest man, but it doesn't murder dishonesty. Violence may go to the point of murdering the hater, but it doesn't murder hate. It may increase hate. It is always a descending spiral leading nowhere. This is the ultimate weakness of violence. It multiplies evil and violence in the universe. It doesn't solve any problems. In the book written by Martin Luther King Jr. in 1967, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos to Community. While the world was grappling with COVID-19, America experienced an unprecedented spike in homicides. According to CBS News, the National Shooting Sports Foundation reported that nearly 5 million Americans bought a firearm for the first time in 2020, pointing to factors including the pandemic and nationwide protests against police brutality that at times included violence and looting. Additionally, the number of stand your ground states increased, suggesting a return to the Wild Wild West with no legislative response to curb gun violence. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. From the report, Where Do We Go From Here? delivered at the 11th Convention of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, 1967. This year we saw the manifestation of hate, a hatred of people in need of refuge, coming to a country that always boasted from one of our greatest monuments to send us "you're tired and you're poor." We showed an intolerance and a hate so great that we took their children from them as punishment for their crime of wanting a better life for themselves and their children. No human heart could harbor this kind of hate or justify the imprisonment of children because of the crimes of their parents. Segregation has always been evil, and only the misguided reactionary, clothed in the thin garments of irrational emotionalism, will seek to defend it. Segregation is both rationally inexplicable and morally unjustifiable. This address, entitled "Desegregation and the Future," was delivered at the annual luncheon of the National Committee for Rural Schools in 1956. Dr. King posited that while you could rationalize providing separate but equal, this would ultimately be a flawed argument because there is a qualitative component of education that children of color would miss, not being exposed to diverse perspectives and opportunities. We are now seeing a renewal in segregated schools, something that Dr. King warned against. And while the Midwest decline has not been as rapid, the overall trend line is decreasing for all regions in the U.S. An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concern of all humanity. This address is entitled "The Birth of a New Age," delivered in August of 1956 at the 50th anniversary of Phi Alpha. According to Shamar Pramusic, power corrupts, and political leaders run afoul when they have the power to be who they really are, without regard to how their behavior impacts other people. Impulse control and behavior seem to always be in check when someone wants to elevate their status. It's what happens to them when they actually get there that often derails their careers. Ambition can be blinding, and leaders who fail to recognize this can invoke pain on those who must follow them. Freedom is never voluntarily granted by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, 1963. History will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. Martin Luther King's book, Stride Towards Freedom, The Montgomery Story, published 1958. In 1968, African Americans were about 5.4 times as likely as whites to be in prison or jail. Today, African Americans are 6.4 times as likely as whites to be incarcerated. I know why the caged bird sings, "Ah me," when his wing is bruised and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars and would be free. It is not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core, but a plea that upward to heaven he flings. I know why the caged bird sings. Excerpt from Sympathy, 1899, by poet Paul Laurence Dunbar.
I'm Dr. Melvin Woodard, pastor of New Salem Baptist Church of Indianapolis, Indiana. And Dr. Michelle asked me to respond to a question. Has the dream been realized? The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And in short, my answer is no. Washington Post had an article back in 2011 that asked how many people believe that the dream had been realized. And less than half of the respondents said it had not. And I still agree to this day that it has not been realized. Racial equity has not been achieved. Economic equity has not been achieved. Educational equity has not been achieved. And therefore, the dream is still deferred. When we think about the fact that we've had the first Black president in Barack Obama, and in just a few days, the first female Black vice president is going to take her position, Kamala Harris. It's grateful to know that we have ascended, but there is still so much as it relates to racial inequity, and we have seen that over the past 4 years. When I think about economic disparities, African Americans are definitely disproportionately on the other side of the economic equation. And that is something that has to be addressed extremely soon. And educationally, I have 12 degrees, but I find myself every day having to defend my integrity as well as my knowledge. We have a lot from a people standpoint to overcome. So I want to reiterate, has the dream been realized? No, it has not. There's a lot of work to be done, and certainly we can do that together. God bless you. May heaven smile upon you as our prayer.
While it is true that Black people over age 25 are completing college in greater numbers, sadly it is also true that those same graduates are not seeing the fruits of their labor, not because of their culture, morality, or traits, but merely because they are affected by systemic racism. Regrettably, there is a significant home ownership gap. U.S. Black home ownership rates remain below 45%, reminiscent of numbers from over 25 years ago. While we should certainly be proud of the strides that the African American community has made in terms of the reduction of overall poverty, we have to ask ourselves conversely, what are we doing with this increased wealth and economic empowerment? Are we moving from a consumer economy to investors and owners? These are significant questions we have to ask ourselves. What we have seen is the need to have representation in government who will create laws to abolish systemic racism and other barriers to success for Black people. We are a nation of laws that for too long has not resulted in the safety, security, or prosperity in our communities. We now understand the power and necessity of our vote in order to make lasting change in this country, not just for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children. We have made and continue to make history. Dr. King knew then what we know now. The dream can be achieved, but we must push on because the struggle wages on.
And as we work, my friends, let me say to you that we must continue to work with the right method and the right attitude I know the temptations that come to us, those of us who have been trampled over by the iron feet of oppression so long, those of us who have been the last hired in the first fight so long, those of us who have seen the viciousness of lynching mobs with our own eyes, those of us who have known the tragedies of police brutality, that is the danger that we will end up bitter. And that is the danger and the ever-present temptation that we will retaliate with violence. But I hope this afternoon that we will continue to see that nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to the Negro in his struggle for freedom and human dignity. No, we need not become bitter. We need not hate. Most revolutions in the past have been based on hope and hate. The hope grew out of the rising expectation that came, believing that the day would come when the old order would pass away. And the hate grew out of a bitterness and a violent reaction against the perpetrators of the old order. But God grants that we will keep the hope element of this revolution, but that we will change the hate element, and that we will channelize the potentialities for hate into the meaningful channel of nonviolent resistance, and realize that that is another way, a way as old as the insights of Jesus of Nazareth, and as modern as the techniques of Mohandas K. Gandhi. That is another way.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a personal mentor of mine when I was growing up. I was one of the young people who helped organize the famous March on Washington, August the 28th, 1963. I remember Dr. Martin Luther King. The question, is King's dream a reality today? Is King's dream a reality today? Looking back at all the lessons he taught us when he came to us as the group of young people being leaders. His philosophy, what is his dream? What was Dr. Martin Luther King's dream? Dr. Martin Luther King's dream was to have a world with peace and unity, a world filled up with agape love that we could call a beloved community, be it in the home, at school, in the state, but in the world. He believed in a united community, beloved community with agape love. He believed there should be a world where you treat others as you would want to be treated. And with that, looking at today, I don't think Dr. Martin Luther King's dream is reality. I remember he would tell us there are three evils that if they exist in society, society cannot be an agape, a beloved community society. And those three evils: violence, racism, and poverty. Violence, racism, and poverty. And he said if these exist in any community, you cannot have a beloved community. You can't have unity. You can't have equity for all, because these are not from the beloved community. This is not his dream. And so I say to you today, when we look at what's happening in Washington, D.C., the violence, the fighting, when we look at the poverty, the homelessness, the imprisonment, when we look at all of these things, we know that it is not the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King. But we can get there. We can overcome. What he says with love, if we purposely, conscientiously decide we're going to take steps to change this world to a better world, encouraging all people to love one another in agape love, reminding people that we are here for one another and it should be a world of peace and unity. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is Dr. Patricia Atelekan, International Educators Hall of Fame, and also the mother of Reverend Dr. Tokumbo Adelekan, pastor, Tabernacle Baptist Church, Dayton, Ohio.
Good afternoon. My name is Brandon McLean. I'm the Montgomery County Recorder. I was asked to feature a clip and answer the question of if Dr. King's dream has been realized. Today, my answer is not completely. However, there have been facets of the dream that we are living today. Dr. King proclaimed that the most persistent, urgent question is, what are we doing for those others who are in need? Today, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, there is an answer. People are gathering and supporting one another, our neighbors and fellow community members who are in a time of need. Right now, more so than ever, we have to band together and recognize that I'm my neighbor and my neighbor is me. We're all interrelated, interdependent. No one is in this world alone. No one feels pain alone. And no one goes through tragedy and strife alone. We are all connected. And as we are all connected, we have to ensure that we recognize that the burden of one is the burden of all. And only together can we overcome. Those things start by remembering and recognizing and honoring the legacy of Dr. King, the fact that service to others is a noble calling. It is a calling that we can only fulfill by upholding the principles that he recognized and the principles that he lived his life by. His life, his death, his legacy were dedicated to the furtherance of equality and equal rights for all people. That is where we are today, and by upholding those principles, his dream will be realized.
Has the dream been realized? On this day, January 18, 2021, we celebrate the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. No matter how you see this day, it often means a lot of things for a lot of people, especially people who are living witnesses ones who vividly remember the nature and circumstances surrounding that time frame. Have you noticed that every MLK Day, we're reminded of many of the phrases that he so eloquently spoke about on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial back on August 28, 1963, during the peaceful yet resolute protests and March on Washington? He mentioned several conditions that still exist 100 years later that one would think have been realized. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's speech included powerful words that we often cannot get out of our minds. Those words are equality, equity, opportunity, real justice, peace, and freedom. Do we not still dream of those things today? Well, it's now 2021, 57 years since that speech, and I ask you to reflect on some of the words that helped that speech resonate in your minds. Has the dream been realized? Can you answer that question? Honestly, I had to grapple with it. I sense that we have as many questions as we have answers. Our perspectives are shaped by what we've seen, experienced, felt, been subjected to, and even what we or our family members and those closest to us have had to overcome or who have had to endure. As an African American woman, wife, mother, Christian, and professor who desires to see the glory of God in our every situation and circumstance, I would have to say no. No, because racial injustice still persists today in 2021. No, because of still hearing of Black men, boys, and now women whose lives have been taken with no reasoning as to why nothing seems to be done. Or, shall I say, those who've done those things have not been held accountable. No, because glass or even invisible ceilings exist in organizations where one cannot reach the levels of senior leadership for one reason or another, but that has gotten better. Sometimes there are organizations that don't even have a ceiling, and one wonders why they can't rise higher. No, because peaceful protests in Black communities of our nation are met with violence quickly, and those who want to see change are held back when what is desired originally